The boardroom felt like a pressure cooker, and Xavier Ingram was about to blow the lid off it. He stood at the head of the glass conference table, his 6'3" frame casting a shadow over the quarterly reports scattered before him, and delivered the verdict that would shake his manufacturing empire to its core. "We're relocating the flagship production facility," Xavier announced, his deep voice cutting through the stunned silence. "Millbrook, Vermont, population 3,000. We break ground in 6 weeks." His executive team exchanged bewildered glances. Xavier Ingram, the 32-year-old CEO who had transformed his grandfather's struggling furniture company into Ingram Industries, a $200 million luxury home goods empire, didn't make impulsive decisions. But moving their main operation from Manhattan to a town most of them couldn't find on a map seemed like corporate suicide. "Sir, with all due respect," his operations director ventured, "what's in Millbrook besides maple trees?" Xavier's jaw tightened. "Lower overhead, skilled craftspeople, and a community that actually values manufacturing. Plus, it's 3 hours from the city. Close enough to maintain our headquarters here, far enough to cut costs by 40%. The numbers work. Make it happen." 3 weeks later, Xavier's Mercedes SUV rolled down Millbrook's Main Street, and he immediately questioned every decision that had led him here. The town looked like a postcard that time forgot. A single traffic light blinked lazily above an intersection where a hardware store, a diner called the Maple Leaf, and what appeared to be a combination bookstore and coffee shop formed the commercial heart of downtown. His Manhattan penthouse bathroom was probably bigger than most of these storefronts. He parked in front of the old textile mill he'd purchased sight unseen, the building that would become Ingram Industries' new manufacturing headquarters. The structure was solid, built in the 1890s with the kind of craftsmanship you couldn't find anymore, but it needed serious work. As he stepped out of his car, adjusting his Tom Ford suit jacket, he felt every eye in town tracking his movement. "You must be the New Yorker buying up our history." Xavier turned to find a woman standing on the sidewalk, arms crossed, chin lifted in challenge. She wore faded jeans, work boots caked with sawdust, and a flannel shirt rolled to her elbows. Her dark blonde hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and her hazel eyes assessed him with the kind of skepticism usually reserved for door-to-door salesmen. "Xavier Ingram," he said, extending his hand. "And you are?" "Unimpressed," she replied, but she shook his hand anyway. Her grip was firm, her palm calloused. "Fiona Harper. I run the woodworking cooperative 3 buildings down. We've been watching your people measuring and surveying for weeks. None of you have bothered to introduce yourselves to the actual residents." Xavier bristled. He hadn't built a multimillion-dollar company by worrying about small-town hurt feelings. "This is a business venture, Miss Harper, not a social call. It's Miss, and that building you just bought. My great-grandfather worked in that mill. So did half the grandparents in this town. You're not just buying bricks and mortar, you're buying our heritage. I'm revitalizing it," Xavier corrected, his patience thinning. "Bringing jobs, investment, economic growth. You're welcome." Fiona's laugh was sharp. "Right, let me guess. You'll hire a bunch of outsiders, pay minimum wage, expect tax breaks from our town, and when the profit margins don't meet your expectations, you'll shut it all down and leave us worse off than before. We've seen this movie. You don't know anything about me or my business. I know your type. Big city executives slumming it in the countryside, thinking we're all quaint and simple. Well, Mr. Ingram, we're not a tax write-off. We're a community." She walked away before he could respond, her boots echoing on the old sidewalk. Xavier stood there, jaw clenched, watching her disappear into a building with a hand-painted sign reading Millbrook Artisan Collective. Of all the entitled, presumptuous locals he'd expected to deal with, this confrontational woodworker hadn't been on his list. Over the next 2 weeks, Xavier spent his days overseeing the mill renovation and his evenings at the town's only decent lodging, a bed and breakfast run by a cheerful woman named Dorothy, who seemed determined to feed him pie at every opportunity. He learned quickly that Millbrook operated on different rules than Manhattan. People moved slower, talked longer, and seemed to have opinions about everything he did. The town council meeting about his zoning permits turned into a 3-hour discussion about traffic patterns, noise concerns, and something called preserving the character of Millbrook. Xavier, accustomed to streamlined business dealings, found himself arguing with a retired teacher about truck delivery schedules. "The morning deliveries will wake the whole East Side," the woman insisted. "Then I suggest investing in better windows," Xavier replied, earning himself disapproving murmurs from the crowd. He noticed Fiona Harper sitting in the back row, watching him with that same skeptical expression. When their eyes met, she didn't look away. Neither did he. After the meeting, he found her waiting by his car. "You really know how to win hearts and minds," Fiona said. "I'm not here to win a popularity contest. I'm here to run a business. In a town where your business depends on community support, good luck with that strategy." She paused, then seemed to make a decision. "Look, I don't like how you're going about this, but I also don't want to see that building sit empty for another decade. My cooperative could help." Xavier raised an eyebrow. "Help how, local craftspeople?" "My collective has 15 members, all skilled in woodworking, metalwork, textiles. You want quality manufacturing, we know quality. You want community buy-in, hire locally or keep making enemies. Your choice." It was a practical solution wrapped in a challenge. Xavier hated that it made sense. "I'll tour your facility tomorrow, 10 a.m. Make it 8. Some of us start work before our first latte." Fiona walked away, leaving Xavier standing in the parking lot wondering when he'd lost control of this conversation. The Millbrook Artisan Collective occupied a converted barn that smelled of fresh wood and linseed oil. Xavier arrived at 8 sharp, still wearing his city clothes, feeling absurdly overdressed. Fiona met him at the door in the same practical work clothes, a pencil tucked behind her ear. "Welcome to where actual work happens," she said. The space was impressive. Individual workstations lined the walls, each member's area reflecting their craft. A silversmith worked at a torch in one corner. A weaver sat at a massive loom. And in the center, Fiona's domain showcased furniture that made Xavier stop in his tracks. The pieces were extraordinary. A dining table with inlaid designs that seemed to flow like water. Chairs that balanced modern clean lines with traditional joinery. A cabinet with hand-carved details that must have taken months. "You made these?" Xavier asked, running his hand along the table's smooth surface. "Hard to believe the local yokel has talent." Fiona's voice carried an edge, but he caught something else underneath: defensiveness, pride. "I was going to say these are museum quality. Where did you train?" The question seemed to surprise her. "Rhode Island School of Design, full scholarship, graduated top of my class, got job offers from design firms in Boston and San Francisco. But you came back here. This is home." "My family is here. The life I want is here." She met his eyes. Not everyone measures success by the size of their bank account. It felt like an accusation, and Xavier felt his defenses rise. Success pays the bills. So does good work and a community that supports each other. "But what would you know about that?" "You don't know anything about me," Xavier said, his voice low and controlled. "Then enlighten me. Why is a CEO from Manhattan slumming it in Vermont?" The word slumming ignited something in Xavier. "You want to know why?" "Because while you're making 5 custom tables a year for rich clients who'll appreciate your artistic vision, I'm trying to manufacture quality furniture that ordinary families can actually afford. Because my grandfather started this company in a garage, and before private equity vultures convinced my father to go public and chase quarterly profits, we actually built things that mattered. Because I'm trying to get back to that, and maybe, just maybe, I thought a town that supposedly values craftsmanship would understand." Fiona stared at him, and Xavier realized he'd revealed far more than he intended. The silence stretched between them, charged with something he couldn't quite name. "The old Ingram Furniture Company," Fiona said finally. "My grandparents had a bedroom set, solid cherry. It's still in my parents' house, beautiful after 50 years. Your grandfather made that, probably. He handcrafted every piece until the company got too big." Xavier's voice softened despite himself. "I'm trying to scale that quality, blend traditional techniques with modern efficiency. That's why I'm here." Fiona studied him with new eyes, and Xavier found himself noticing details he'd been too irritated to see before. The way her ponytail caught the light streaming through the barn windows, the strength in her hands, the intelligence in her gaze. "Let me show you something," she said. She led him to her workstation and pulled out a leather portfolio filled with designs. Furniture that blended function and artistry, traditional woodworking with contemporary aesthetics. As she explained her process, her whole demeanor changed. The defensiveness fell away, replaced by passionate expertise. Xavier found himself leaning closer, asking questions, genuinely engaged. "This joint here," he said, pointing to a drawing. "How long does it take to cut? By hand, 3 hours. But if you had the right setup, maybe 20 minutes with a skilled worker and proper jigs. Show me." They spent the next 2 hours in her workshop, Fiona demonstrating techniques while Xavier asked increasingly technical questions. He'd grown up around manufacturing, understood the business side intimately, but watching her work reminded him of his grandfather's workshop, of the magic that happened when skill met passion. "You could teach this," Xavier said as Fiona completed a perfect dovetail joint. "My workers." Quality control training. Fiona set down her tools. "Is this a job offer? It's a proposal. Not me hiring you, a partnership. The collective trains my workers in traditional techniques. In exchange, I provide equipment access, materials at cost, and guaranteed purchase orders for custom pieces. Your artists get steady income and resources. I get quality craftsmanship and community integration. You want to buy your way into our good graces. I want to build something that lasts. There's a difference." Fiona was quiet for a long moment. "I need to discuss this with the collective. We vote on everything. Democratic. How refreshingly inefficient. It's called respecting people. You should try it." But she was almost smiling when she said it, and Xavier felt something shift between them. Not quite friendship, but maybe the beginning of mutual respect. Over the following weeks, Xavier found himself spending more time in Millbrook than Manhattan. The collective voted to accept his partnership proposal, and suddenly, Xavier was attending workshops on traditional joinery and sustainable lumber sourcing. Fiona proved to be a demanding teacher, accepting no shortcuts, insisting on quality even when it slowed production. They argued constantly. About methods, about timelines, about whether something was efficient or just fast and sloppy, as Fiona put it. But beneath the arguments, Xavier felt something else growing. He caught himself looking forward to their daily meetings, started arriving earlier, staying later, finding reasons to stop by her workshop. One evening, he found her working alone, hand planing a piece of walnut by lamplight. The barn was quiet except for the rhythmic sound of the plane and the whisper of wood shavings falling. "Don't you ever stop?" Xavier asked from the doorway. Fiona looked up and he saw the fatigue in her eyes. "Commission for a wedding. Anniversary gift from a husband to his wife. 50 years of marriage, the piece needs to reflect that kind of permanence." Xavier walked closer, watching her work. "Can I try?" She hesitated, then handed him the plane. Gentle pressure, let the tool do the work, feel the grain. She stood close, guiding his hands, and Xavier was acutely aware of her presence. The scent of sawdust and something floral. The warmth of her body beside his. The quiet intimacy of the moment. "Like this?" he asked, his voice rougher than intended. "Exactly like that." Their eyes met, and the air between them crackled with sudden tension. Xavier saw Fiona swallow hard, saw the pulse quicken at her throat. He leaned in, drawn by something he didn't fully understand, and she didn't pull away. But then a car door slammed outside, breaking the moment. Fiona stepped back quickly, taking the plane from his hands. "You should go." It's late. Xavier wanted to argue, wanted to close the distance between them again, but something in her expression stopped him. He left, but barely slept that night, his mind full of hazel eyes and calloused hands and the ghost of a moment that almost happened. The next morning brought crisis. Xavier's operations director called from New York with news that their primary supplier had backed out, leaving them without materials for the first production run. The setback could delay everything by months, cost hundreds of thousands in penalties and missed contracts. Xavier was on his phone in the town square, pacing and shouting at his legal team when Fiona appeared with 2 cups of coffee. "Trouble in paradise?" she asked. "Supply chain disaster. Everything's falling apart. Maybe I can help." She led him to her truck and drove 20 miles into the mountains to a sawmill operation he never would have found alone. The owner, a man named George with forearms like tree trunks, greeted Fiona with a hug. "George, this is Xavier Ingram. He needs lumber, a lot of it. Quality hardwood, sustainably sourced, consistent supply." George sized Xavier up with a glance. "Heard about you, city boy making waves in Millbrook." "I'm trying to manufacture quality furniture using traditional methods," Xavier said carefully. "Fiona says you're serious about it." "That's good enough for me." George named a price that was better than Xavier's failed supplier, with delivery terms that would keep production on schedule. As they drove back to Millbrook, Xavier looked at Fiona with new appreciation. "You didn't have to do that, George's family. His daughter married my cousin. That's how things work here. We take care of our own." "And I'm one of your own now." Fiona kept her eyes on the road. "You're becoming part of Millbrook, whether you like it or not." The mill renovation completed ahead of schedule, and the grand opening became a town event. Dorothy from the Bed and Breakfast organized a potluck. The mayor gave a speech. Local families toured the facility, and Xavier watched parents explain to their children how furniture was made. Saw the pride in faces when they recognized techniques from the collective's training program. Fiona stood beside him during the ribbon cutting, and when the crowd applauded, she leaned close and whispered, "Not bad for a city boy." "Not bad for a small-town woodworker either," he replied, and her laugh was warm enough to ease the knot of anxiety he'd been carrying for months. Production began, and to Xavier's surprise, it worked. The blend of modern efficiency and traditional craftsmanship created furniture that exceeded his projections for quality while meeting his cost targets. Orders poured in. His board of directors, skeptical at first, began praising his vision. Ingram Industries' stock climbed, but success brought new pressures. Xavier was spending 3 days a week in Manhattan, managing the corporate side, attending board meetings, dealing with investors who suddenly wanted to expand the Millbrook model to other locations. His time in Vermont became precious, compressed, always rushed, Fiona noticed. "You're wearing yourself out," she said one evening when Xavier appeared at the collective, tie loosened, exhaustion evident. "It's temporary. Once we stabilize the production metrics, I can delegate more." "You've been saying that for 6 weeks. What do you want me to say, Fiona? That I can't be in 2 places at once, that I'm trying to balance a multi-million-dollar company with what's happening here, that every time I leave Millbrook, it feels like I'm leaving something important behind." The words hung between them, heavy with implication. "What's happening here?" Fiona asked quietly. Xavier looked at her, really looked at her, and all the feelings he'd been pushing aside for months crystallized into clarity. "You, us, whatever this is. Xavier, I don't think we can do this." The words hit him like a physical blow. "Why not? Because you're you and I'm me. Your life is in Manhattan, running a company, living in penthouses, flying to Milan for design shows. My life is here. This town, these people, this work, we want different things." "Do we?" Xavier stepped closer. "Because what I want is standing right in front of me, and I don't think I'm alone in this." Fiona's eyes glistened. "It doesn't matter what we want, you'll always be pulled back to the city. I'll always choose to stay here. How does that work? I don't know. But I know I haven't felt this alive in years. Not in any boardroom or closing any deal, just here, with you, working on something real, building something that matters. That has to count for something. It counts for everything. That's what makes it so hard. She turned away, but Xavier caught her hand, pulling her back. Then let's figure it out, together. No more running, no more pretending this isn't happening. And when you have to choose between Millbrook and Manhattan, between your company and this life, what then? I don't know, Xavier admitted. But I know I'm tired of living half a life. I built a company I barely recognized to please a father who died before he could see it succeed. I've spent 10 years chasing someone else's version of success, and I'm done. This place, what we're building here, it's bringing me back to who I'm supposed to be. Fiona searched his face. You're serious. I've never been more serious about anything. She kissed him then, or maybe he kissed her. It was impossible to tell who moved first. But suddenly they were pressed together, months of tension and denied attraction pouring into that kiss. Xavier's hands cupped her face, and Fiona's fingers curled into his shirt, and everything else fell away except this moment, this woman, this rightness. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Fiona rested her forehead against his chest. This is crazy, she whispered, probably. You're going to drive me insane, looking forward to it. She laughed, the sound muffled against his shirt, and Xavier held her tighter, marveling at how perfectly she fit in his arms. Dating Fiona was unlike anything Xavier had experienced. The women he'd known in Manhattan were sophisticated, polished, comfortable in 5-star restaurants and gallery openings. Fiona took him ice fishing at dawn, taught him to identify trees by their bark, dragged him to the town's amateur theater production where her nephew played a talking tree. This is your idea of entertainment, Xavier whispered as they watched the painfully earnest performance. This is my family supporting my family. Pay attention, the singing vegetables are next. But Xavier was paying attention, just not to the stage. He watched Fiona's face, saw how she cheered for her nephew, how she belonged to this community in ways he'd never belonged anywhere. It was foreign and fascinating and somehow exactly what he'd been missing. He brought her to Manhattan once, to a charity gala his company sponsored. Fiona looked stunning in a simple black dress, turning heads without trying. But Xavier saw her discomfort in the crowd, the way she tensed when people dropped names and flaunted wealth. This is your world, she said on the drive home. Was my world, Xavier corrected. I'm not sure it fits anymore. Xavier, you can't just walk away from your company. I'm restructuring it, building something sustainable that doesn't require me to sacrifice everything else. He glanced at her. Unless you're having doubts. No doubts about us. But I worry about you having regrets later. Xavier pulled the car over at a scenic overlook between the city and Millbrook, the lights of Manhattan glittering in the distance behind them. You see those lights? I spent 15 years chasing that. Building an empire, proving I could transform my grandfather's legacy into something bigger. And I did. I succeeded by every measurable standard, but you know what? I was miserable. Working 80-hour weeks, sleeping 4 hours a night, missing weddings and funerals and life because I was too busy succeeding. He turned to face her fully. Then I came to Millbrook. Met a stubborn woodworker who called me out on my arrogance and made me remember why I fell in love with this work in the first place. Who showed me what building a real life looks like. I'm not giving anything up, Fiona. I'm finally getting it right. Fiona's eyes were bright with tears. I love you. I didn't want to, tried not to, but I do. Good, because I love you too. Have since you read me the riot act on the sidewalk that first day. Liar, you thought I was an annoying local. An annoying local who was absolutely right about everything. It was infuriating and attractive. She laughed and kissed him, and Xavier thought about all the moments that had led here. Every argument, every compromise, every time they'd challenged each other to be better. This was what he'd been searching for without knowing it. The following months brought changes. Xavier restructured Ingram Industries, promoting his operations director to president of daily operations while he took on the role of chairman. focusing on long-term strategy and design. He sold his Manhattan penthouse and built a home on 10 acres outside Millbrook, a house where he could see mountains from his office window. The board resisted at first, worried about his reduced presence, but the numbers told the story. The Millbrook facility was outperforming projections. Customer satisfaction was at an all-time high, and the company's reputation for quality was attracting premium contracts. Success, it turned out, didn't require sacrificing your soul. Fiona expanded the collective, taking on apprentices, teaching the next generation of craftspeople. Xavier watched her thrive, saw how she lit up when explaining a technique or praising a student's work. She was born to teach, to lead, to build community. 1 year after that first contentious meeting on the sidewalk, Xavier returned to the spot with a picnic basket and a plan. Fiona thought they were celebrating the mill's anniversary, which was partially true. But as the sun set over Millbrook's Main Street, Xavier pulled out a small wooden box he'd spent 3 months crafting in secret. "What's this?" Fiona asked. "Open it." Inside, nestled in velvet, was a ring. Not a conventional engagement ring, but something he'd designed specifically for her. The band was carved from rare koa wood, inlaid with delicate strands of gold, smooth and warm and perfect. "Fiona Harper, you changed my life. Challenged everything I thought I knew about success and happiness and what matters. You made me better, made me whole. I love you more than I knew I could love anyone, and I want to spend the rest of my life learning and growing and building things together. Will you marry me?" Fiona was crying openly now, nodding before she could speak. "Yes, yes, you impossible man, yes." The ring fit perfectly because Xavier had secretly measured one of her other rings, because even in romance he couldn't help being thorough. They kissed on the sidewalk where they'd first met, and Mrs. Henderson from the hardware store happened to be locking up and let out a whoop that brought people running. Within minutes, half the town seemed to know. Dorothy appeared with champagne from the bed and breakfast. The mayor insisted on taking pictures. George drove in from his sawmill to shake Xavier's hand and hug Fiona so hard her feet left the ground. "Welcome to the family," George told Xavier, "for real this time." They married that fall in a ceremony that blended both worlds. The wedding took place at the mill, transformed for the day with flowers and lights and furniture they'd built together. Xavier's business associates mingled with Millbrook residents. His executive team learned to square dance. Fiona's nephew, the former talking tree, served as ring bearer with solemn importance. During their first dance, Fiona whispered, "Any regrets?" Xavier looked around at the celebration, at the community they'd built, at the life they'd created together. "Not a single one. This is exactly where I'm supposed to be. Even though we argued for the first 3 months, especially because of that, you never let me get away with anything. Someone has to keep your ego in check, CEO, former CEO, current husband, future father if we're lucky." Fiona's eyes widened. "You want kids, a whole workshop full of them, teaching them to build things, to value quality, to understand that success isn't about how much you make but what you make of your life." He pulled her closer. "What do you think? I think you've become quite the philosopher." Millbrook rubbed off on me. "I love you," Fiona said simply. "I love you too. Even when you're being stubborn, especially when I'm being stubborn." Xavier laughed and spun her around the dance floor, surrounded by friends and family, anchored in a place that finally felt like home. 2 years later, Xavier stood in the nursery he'd built himself, using techniques Fiona had taught him, and held his daughter for the first time. Clara Ingram, named after his grandfather, slept peacefully in his arms while Fiona watched from the rocking chair, tired but glowing. "She has your determination," Xavier whispered, "already making demands, keeping us on schedule, and your stubbornness. She's going to be a handful. Good, the world needs more women who know what they want and aren't afraid to fight for it." He looked at Fiona. "I learned that from her mother." The mill continued to thrive, becoming a model for sustainable manufacturing that other companies began to emulate. The collective expanded into a full school with Fiona as director, teaching students from around the country. Xavier wrote a book about rebuilding Ingram Industries, about the philosophy of valuing people and craftsmanship over pure profit. It became required reading in business schools, but his proudest moments weren't in boardrooms or on bestseller lists. They were in the workshop with Fiona, teaching Clara to sand wood with patient hands. They were at town meetings where they still argued passionately about Millbrook's future. They were in the quiet evenings on their porch, watching the mountains turn purple at sunset, planning what they'd build next. 5 years after that first confrontation on the sidewalk, Xavier was interviewed for a business magazine. The reporter asked about his success, about the dramatic transformation of both his company and his life. "You gave up a lot," the reporter said. "The Manhattan lifestyle, the corporate prestige, do you ever miss it?" Xavier thought about his life now, the home filled with laughter and sawdust. The wife who challenged him daily to be better. The daughter who already showed signs of inheriting both their stubbornness and their passion. The community that had become family, the work that felt meaningful. "I didn't give up anything," Xavier said. "I gained everything. The life I was living before was someone else's dream. This is mine." That night, he told Fiona about the interview while they worked together in the shop, building a crib for their second child, another daughter due in 3 months. "You're getting sentimental in your old age," Fiona teased. "Next you'll be writing poetry." "I'm 37, not elderly, and don't knock poetry. I could write an ode to your dovetail joints. Please don't." Xavier set down his tools and pulled her close, resting his hand on the swell of her belly where their daughter kicked. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what? For seeing who I could be before I saw it myself. For not letting me get away with being less than I could be. For loving me enough to fight with me and challenge me and make me earn every bit of respect." Fiona's eyes glistened. "You did the same for me. Showed me I could have this life I loved and still grow, still build something bigger. Trusted me with your vision, became part of my world instead of trying to change it." "We completed each other," Xavier said. "Even when we were clashing, especially when we were clashing, we were building toward this. Sounds like poetry to me. Then I'm doing something right." They kissed in the workshop, where so much of their relationship had unfolded, surrounded by the tools of their trade and the life they'd built together. Outside, Millbrook settled into evening, lights flickering on in homes where families gathered, where communities thrived, where a big city CEO had found the small town life that finally made him whole. Clara burst into the workshop, her overalls already covered in sawdust despite being clean an hour ago. "Papa, Mama, I made a birdhouse. Come see." Xavier and Fiona exchanged glances, their faces reflecting the same joy, the same gratitude for this beautiful, unexpected life. "Show us," Xavier said, taking his daughter's hand. And as they walked out together, a family bound by love and wood shavings and the magic of building something real, Xavier thought about that first day in Millbrook. How he'd stood on that sidewalk, arrogant and certain, thinking he had all the answers, he'd been so wrong. And being wrong had given him everything he'd never known he wanted. A home, a family, a purpose beyond profit margins. And a woman who'd seen through his expensive suit to the man underneath, who'd challenged him to be better, who'd loved him not despite their differences, but because of how those differences made them stronger together. In the end, it wasn't about small town versus big city, tradition versus innovation, her world or his. It was about building something new together, a life that honored where they'd come from while creating something entirely their own. Clara's birdhouse was lopsided and charming, the joints imperfect but earnest. Xavier praised her effort and suggested gentle improvements, already planning the lessons he'd teach her, the skills he'd pass down. Fiona caught his eye over their daughter's head, and her smile said everything. This was success. This was home. This was love. And it had all started with a clash on a sidewalk, with two people who seemed like opposites discovering they were actually two halves of something perfect, just waiting to be built.